This is part 3 of the review, the week 3 announcements and the review that I was doing of chapter 18. I will get to 19, I promise. This should be the last of the chapter 18 review. The first thing I want to do is show you some structures that are found in the fetal heart while the baby is still developing and growing, and what they're called in the adult. Let's see. I thought it was in this one. Okay, well there's only one other thing I can think of, and that is I do want to talk to you about the mitral valve and problems that you can have when your mitral valve is there's one condition called the mitral valve prolapse, and that will cause a different heartbeat. So I wanted to make sure that you understood that when the heart beats, basically there are two major types of valves. There are the AV valves, and they are on the right side of the heart is the tricuspid valve, and on the left side of the heart is the bicuspid or mitral valve. Those close the loudest. They shut the loudest. I don't know if I can, hold on. I don't know if it's going to let me do anything here. But anyway, they actually close the loudest. They make the loudest sound. So when your heart beats, it makes a lub and then a dup. Lub dup, lub dup, lub dup. And that lub is louder. So that is when the AV valves close. That is when they close because the blood has left the atria and entered the ventricles. When the semilunar valves close, the sound is not as loud, but that is when the blood has left the ventricles and has entered the major arteries, either the aorta or the pulmonary trunk. So the lub comes from the AV valves closing, and the dup comes from the semilunar valves closing. But again, the mitral valves, one other problem that you can have with mitral valves is something called a stenotic mitral valve. And here, I really wish I could type. I know sometimes it allows me to, and sometimes it doesn't. Hold on. Here we go. Okay, so if I can just type this. A stenotic mitral valve. So what it does, it doesn't open wide enough. Stenosis in general, my husband has spinal stenosis, and it just means a stenosis means that an opening is getting smaller over time or is smaller than what it's supposed to be. So stenotic mitral valve means the mitral valve doesn't open enough, and what you're going to hear is a very high pitch click when the valve is not open wide enough. And this is during the contraction of the heart. You're going to hear a very high pitch click if a person has a stenotic mitral valve. Now let's go to the next PowerPoint. This one. Okay, I wanted to see if I could show you the foramen ovale, which is, no, it must be in the last one. The foramen ovale is it's in the fetal heart. I'm trying to go fast, so I won't, okay. Oh, this does talk about heart sounds. Okay, so heart sounds. Heart murmurs are abnormal heart sounds, and that can be caused from a mitral valve prolapse or incompetent or insufficient valve. It causes a swishing sound because the blood regurgitates back into the atria from the ventricle. A stenotic valve means it doesn't open completely, and it's going to cause a high-pitched sound or clicking as blood is forced through that valve. And we talked about that, the mitral valve stenosis or stenotic mitral valve. And we are going to talk about this right here. We're going to talk about cardiac output. Cardiac output is the amount of blood pumped by each ventricle in 1 minute. It equals the heart rate times the stroke volume. And the heart rate, you know what that is. That's the beats per minute. The stroke volume is the volume of blood pumped by one ventricle with each beat. So it correlates with the more forceful the heart is contracting, the higher the stroke volume is going to be. So cardiac output equals the heart rate times the stroke volume. And for an average adult, the heart rate is 75 beats per minute. The stroke volume is 70 milliliters per beat. And that's going to give you about 5.25 liters of blood pumped per minute. So a couple of things I want to talk to you about are the regulation of stroke volume or heart rate and how that can change the cardiac output. And that's all that information is found on this figure. It's figure 1820. And let's just talk about down here. Start from the bottom. The cardiac output is the stroke volume times the heart rate. So what's going to affect cardiac output are things that affect the stroke volume and things that affect the heart rate. So what's going to increase stroke volume? Well, let's look up here at the pink. Exercise. Sympathetic activity happens when you exercise. Your sympathetic nervous system takes over. Your heart rate increases. So your skeletal muscle and respiratory pumps increase their contractility, and that is going to lead to increased venous return. That means increased blood coming back to the heart through the vena cava. And increased venous return will lead to increased stroke volume, and that's going to increase your cardiac output. Epinephrine and thyroxine are both chemicals, hormones, which you can call epinephrine epinephrine a neurotransmitter or a hormone, but thyroxine is thyroid hormone. And those travel through the blood, and those chemicals will cause increased contractility of the heart. And by the way, I'm not going over everything, but EDV stands for end diastolic volume. That means the volume in your heart when your heart is at rest, when it's received all the blood, is directly related to venous return. It's how much blood is in your heart when your heart has received the blood from your body. And then the end systolic volume, ESV, is the amount of blood after your heart has contracted. So increased EDV is going to increase stroke volume, and decreased ESV, so the less blood you have left in your heart after contraction, is going to mean you have an increased stroke volume. These are things you have to kind of think about, but some of the questions definitely are easy. Exercise and any activity from the sympathetic nervous system is going to increase stroke volume. Now, heart rate is going to increase if your sympathetic nervous system is active, and it's going to decrease when your parasympathetic nervous system is active. And what's going to cause those is changes in autonomic output. Exercise, fright, anxiety, those are things that are going to increase your sympathetic activity and decrease your parasympathetic activity. And that's going to increase your heart rate. And that is going to also increase your cardiac output. So I know there were several questions that it didn't seem like people really understood. This is just going over the same things that we just went over. Let's see here. Okay, this is the same exact figure that we were looking at. It doesn't have anything else on it. Hormones that can control or regulate heart rate. Epinephrine, which comes from the adrenal medulla, as well as norepinephrine, can increase heart rate, and it's released when the sympathetic nervous system is active. Thyroxine will increase heart rate. That's released from your thyroid. And it will enhance the effects of norepinephrine and epinephrine. Ions like calcium and potassium, whenever they're not balanced, when those ion concentrations are not balanced, then we can have serious problems. A condition called hypocalcemia means low calcium, and that depresses the heart. Hypercalcemia increases the heart rate and contractility. Both of those conditions can kill you. Both can cause heart attack and can kill you. Hypercalcemia means too much calcium. And we know from learning about the skeletal muscle and how that skeletal muscle contracts, learning how the role of calcium. When there's a lot of calcium, it stimulates contraction. So hypercalcemia is going to stimulate more contraction than normal, more contraction of the heart. Hyperkalemia is high potassium, and that's going to alter the electrical activity, which can lead to heart block and heart attack. Hypokalemia is low potassium, and that's going to result in a feeble heartbeat and or arrhythmias. These are some other factors that influence heart rate. Tachycardia is considered greater than 100 beats per minute. Bradycardia is slower than 60 beats per minute. Then there's a section on congestive heart failure, atherosclerosis, which is the buildup of plaque in your coronary arteries. Seemed like there was a question about atherosclerosis. If you'll give me just a second. Oh, I know. There's some of these questions I'm thinking of that are actually in the next chapter on blood vessels. But anyway, during coronary atherosclerosis, the heart becomes hypoxic. In other words, low oxygen is getting to the cells of your heart because the plaque has built up on the inside of your arteries, so you're not getting as much oxygen to your tissues. I'm looking for things I saw that you guys were missing, because some of this stuff you probably are probably were able to find out. Okay, here we go. Here it is. All right. The opening that connects the atria is called the foramen ovale in the fetal heart. And the remnant that is left over in the adult is called the fossa ovalis. In the fetal heart, there is a connection between the pulmonary trunk to the aorta. It's called the ductus arteriosus. And then in the adult, the remnant of the ductus arteriosus is the ligamentum arteriosum. The foramen ovale and the ligamentum, the foramen ovale and the ductus arteriosus close at or shortly after birth. There's some information on congenital heart defects and some pictures of this. Okay, very fast. When we look at this view of the heart, again, the foramen ovale was here. This is the adult heart, and that foramen ovale has closed and become the fossa ovalis. And then here is the ligamentum arteriosum, which connects the aorta to the pulmonary trunk, and that was called the ductus arteriosus in the infant, which was a connection between the two major arteries of the heart.